Welcome, everybody. This is the opening session of Global Doughnut Days 2025. It's a very big moment for us in the global donut community, all of us, and I'm talking to all of us here online and all of us who will watch these recordings because this is what the community is. It's a big day, set of days, because this coming together for people from all over the world, putting these ideas of doughnut economics into practice. It's why we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab exist, to work with people who are putting these ideas into action. And it's definitely a lab because this is one big experiment of how do we bring about the transformations that we know are needed in the world. How do we start to make them happen where we can, depending on who we are, the country we're in, the context we hold, the roles we play, the imagination we can muster, the allies we can bring together. And that's what has been the ingredients of putting doughnut economics into practice so far. And it's incredibly inspiring to see the community groups that are stepping up and coming into this Global Doughnut Days this year, and the practice that's happening everywhere in the world. I've said for many years, I really believe that 21st century economics is going to be practiced first and theorized later. And that's why we gather together as practitioners to practice this, to invent it, to make 21st century economics. And the theory will catch up. The textbooks are usually quite far behind. They will one day catch up, but this, to my mind, is the forefront of practice. And yet, it's not easy. It never was easy, right? Doughnut Economics was published just after Doughnut Economics was first published. Donald Trump was elected in the US. When the first city wanted to put doughnut economics into practice, everything got shut down by a global pandemic. And in fact, of course, the movements, youth movements that had been rising up around the world to stand for acting on climate change, for creating system change, not climate change, those got stopped in their tracks by the world shutting down. So we know we live in times of crises. We already saw that with the pandemic, but the recent years have brought more instability. We are seeing a rise of authoritarian governments. We're seeing a rise of far-right narratives and momentum. We've seen conflict, wars between nations, within nations, genocide. These feel like very, very challenging times to stand for regenerative and distributive futures. And although we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, together in this community, can show powerful maps of all the community groups around the world, over 60 community groups that have sprung up and are putting doughnut economics into practice, over 50 local governments, municipal governments around the world, from cities to towns to districts to states, putting the concepts of doughnut economics at the heart of their work. And many more beyond doughnut economics. I'm just using this because this is the concept that brings this community together, but also well-being economics, planetary health, buen vivir, Ubuntu, the rise and the return of richer conceptions of how to live. These are springing up. We know this is happening. And yet it can also feel like a drop in the ocean against the tide that is building, against the much more macro geopolitical forces that are in play. And so one can ask, what keeps us going? Why do you keep at this work at your own locality, in your own city, in your own town or your own country, when the forces against it feel like they are so on the rise? And we wanted to kick off with this because we think it's a very real question for many, many people doing this work. And I can't think of three people better to help us explore this than the panelists we have here today. I'm so proud and honored that they've agreed, all of them, to join us today because they're bringing unique perspectives from their own place of work. But of course, we could have invited many, many people from across this community because we're all doing this work in context of change, turmoil, in context that can really leave us afraid and deeply uncertain of which way the future's going. So we're going to hear from Maisarah Faiesall, who is the head of policy strategy and advocacy at Sunway University, but is part of the team that's leading putting doughnut economics into action in Ipoh in Malaysia. It's the first city in Asia that's really said, we're going to embrace the doughnut. We're going to hear from Kamana Bima, who is a professor in Hawaii, a really scholar of indigenous knowledge, and also bringing the ʻāina aloha economic futures work together alive there, which is related to Doughnut Economics and the strong connections between. What does it look like to bring about and return and restore this cosmology and worldview in Hawaii? And we're going to hear from Imandeep Kaur, who is one of the directors of Civic Square in Birmingham, bringing these ideas of Doughnut Economics alive in a neighborhood, in a street, in a small local community. What does it mean to do it at that scale? So they're speaking from very different places, very different scales, very different experiences of position in the world. But I'm sure and I know that they're all going to bring us some rich insights. So with that, I would like to invite, first of all, Maisarah to share us her perspectives from Ipoh, Malaysia. So she's the head of policy, strategy and advocacy at Sunway University. And as I said, part of the team that is putting Doughnut Economics into practice in Ipoh in Malaysia. Maisarah, let me hand over to you. We would love to hear your reflections.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kate, for the kind introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's late afternoon here in Malaysia, but it's really such a pleasure to be here and to be with the community and the work that's come to mean so much for me over the past couple of years. As Kate mentioned, I am based at the Sunway Center for Planetary Health in Sunway University, and we work hand in hand as a knowledge partner with the Ipoh City Council. And Ipoh is a small city in the state of Perak, a state just above the capital, Kuala Lumpur, here in Malaysia. And our work has really been focused on documenting the knowledge and learnings and experiences, but also in building the capacity of city council officers and civil society. So I'm really happy to also see that there are people joining us from Malaysia. So hi to my fellow Malaysians there. I don't have slides per se, but I hope that what I share is able to paint a picture in itself. So I'll leave the work of imagining that to everybody here. But what I'd like to share is maybe a bit more of a personal perspective from the reflections that I've had over the past couple of years, and so that I'd be able to speak more candidly as well. As I reflect, I think about when I first came to know of Doughnut Economics itself, and it was sometime in 2020, when the initial work of exploring the implementation of the Doughnut in Malaysia came about. And this was before it eventually landed in Ipoh and became part of the Perak State Blueprint in 2022. But prior to, dipping my toes in what I do now, and that's planetary health, looking at the intersection of human health and the state of the planet, I was really on the general civil service track. And so as someone, with a relatively young career, and especially so going into this track, I was often told sort of the same few things. I was told to listen, of course. I was told to learn the rules. I was told to find my lane and serve the system. But what I was never told was actually to reimagine, and to reimagine that things could be fundamentally, different in a positive way. And I think for too long, we've been trained institutionally and culturally, as I have, to be unable to conceive a thriving future that exists within the planet's means. And the economy, will always be at odds with the planet, because economy is growth, or, greed in the name of growth, whatever you may call it. But in essence, the work that we do on planetary health especially really looks at systems. And this ties in so closely with the work of regenerative economics, naturally, because we understand that the systems we've built are designed for, in a way, self-destruction, but we can no longer afford the luxury of pretending otherwise. And so the work of reimagining in this sense is so important, because it's about not accepting to only optimize a flawed machine. It's about recognizing that we're trapped in a very dangerous cognitive struggle. And so maybe I'll focus, on really two parts to why I think this work is so important in this time, especially in the space of global uncertainties. The first cognitive struggle is really on short-termism, short-term thinking. The things that we see on the news daily, as Kate has mentioned also, the geopolitical tensions, the rise in militarism, the genocide, the conflicts after conflicts, they're not so much an interruption of the global economy, but really the reflection of a global order that's packaged in a regressing value system. And it's the same value system that creates and perpetuates unequal, growth-addicted, extractive systems. And at the same time, we're also so heavily governed by political cycles that rarely exceed 4 or 5 years, which incentivizes leaders to prioritize visible, but also quick wins, the new highway, the quick solutions to be popular with the public and such, over the more generational long-term investments in climate adaptation, for example, or true social justice. And what gets sacrificed, as we've noticed, is really the long term. And that's so applicable to, for me, working on planetary health, is really the challenge that planetary health, and so is regenerative economics, is so rooted on that long-term systems thinking and equity and justice. And these are exactly the principles that are being bulldozed over in favor of, territorialism or profits. But regenerative economics in this context, and the way that I see it, and then is not just a nice to have project, but essential really for human security, especially in the face of the planetary crisis. And I speak also as somebody, coming from the global south, in places like my home country, in Malaysia. We have somewhat internalized that economic growth is the one and only prerequisite for environmental sustainability, for planetary health, that we must first play catch up to the consumption and extraction patterns of wealthier nations before us, before we can even afford the luxury of caring for the planet. And this is a very common sentiment with the people that I engage with across all levels, because it's something that I think we've been sort of taught or conditioned to think. And that's why really, a call to reimagine differently. So in the same way that I guess the region is big on the whole buy now, pay later approach when it comes to our online shopping and e-commerce, we take on the whole burn now, clean up later when it comes to the planet, really. Because another common sentiment that we also hear is we contribute only less than 1% of GHG emissions, for example, in the case of Malaysia. So why the rush? Why don't we wait and see others first? Which is a really dangerous narrative and dangerous perspective to be thinking about. Because even though the cost of delayed action, it is thinking still exists, even though the cost of delayed actions we've seen today is really paid first and hardest by those in the global south, and especially so in Southeast Asia being quite a big climate and health hotspot. So that's really the struggle that we face, to zoom out and daring ourselves to reimagine differently, to question whether catching up to a broken model, is it really true development, or is it just joining the queue for an inevitable collapse? So what has been helpful actually really in the case of our engagements with Doughnut Economics in terms of approaching well-being in economic development or even urban planning is really giving us the political clarity to reject that toxic catch-up game, because it shows us that we don't necessarily have to choose between a decent life for all and a healthy planet. And in fact, to better understand that pursuing prosperity outside of the ecological ceiling, it's not really true prosperity. It's prosperity that's brittle, that's short-lived, and can be destructive, right? So having this force for long-term thinking has really been quite helpful in the work that we do, and so necessary to be further amplified. But the second, I think, why this work continues to be important, at least for the next a time to come, is really that equally dangerous cognitive struggle to embrace systems thinking instead of silos. Again, as I mentioned, like planetary health is so rooted in long-term systems thinking. And so it's an innate struggle for us. For us, we understand that when we destroy forests, we destabilize the climate and we increase the zoonotic spillover risks. Just like how we've seen in the COVID pandemic. And at the same time, when climate instability drives resource scarcity, we fuel migration, we fuel conflicts, and military aggression and such. So for us working on this, it makes natural sense, and health, well-being is at the center of these crises. But to look at systems so complex and so broad, such as this, is extremely overwhelming, and it's scary even. And that's precisely, the kind of sentiment and the perspectives that we hear also through the people that we engage with. They might be, they're open to it and they're welcoming to it, but they don't know how to begin. And I think that's why I really resonate with what Kate said earlier about, the 21st century economics will be practiced first and theorized later. I think that's probably the only way to do it, is to just bulldoze through and test it out. In ASEAN, for example, more and more issues related to the climate impacts on human security touch on all three of the ASEAN pillars. And the way ASEAN functions is really, those are the bedrock of the ASEAN governance structure itself. So we have three pillars of political, security, economic, and socio-cultural. But any environmental, or most environmental related issues tend to be lumped under sociocultural, which is arguably the least resourced, without acknowledging that the crises we face today cut across all of the pillars that we operate under or that we've grown used to. So it's still that challenge of, how do we operationalize something as big as planetary health, something that is so rooted in systems thinking? And I think it's the same struggle with SDGs. For instance, we know that our progress towards the SDGs so far have not been in the way that we want it to be. Well, we've also grown accustomed to the 17 goals and the hundreds of indicators, but to acknowledge the trade-off that some goals incite on other goals can be quite daunting because we don't know where to begin. But so to have a visual framework like the Doughnut Economics that allows us to reimagine differently, that it's not an either-or situation, and that's really rooted in the mindset change and the want to reimagine and do things differently, is so critical, because not just because visuals help, but also because we can reimagine our ways of working, and so that we can view development as a way that is not just a ladder, but really more connected by the same dough, so to say, rather than pillarized or sectioned off by countries. Well, I mean, kind of reflecting more on Ipoh, the good thing is that the shifts that we see now don't just hinge on heavily negotiated intergovernmental processes and global treaties, but happening through place-based action on the ground. And I think this is also really important in the space of geopolitics now, and especially as countries turn more inward. Local governments and city councils are really where action happens and really where people look to. So really quite a critical space to invest in. And I'll have to use Ipoh as an example here, because Ipoh was once a glorious tin mining industry in the 19th century, but it was a city built on the very definition of extraction. It was creating enormous wealth for very few, but also leaving behind, devastating environmental signatures like the scarred mountains, the toxic mining quarries, and all that. Really took decades to remove the toxic waste from. So Ipoh, in a way, was like the poster child of this take, make, dispose model. But the good thing is that the people of Ipoh nowadays chose to reimagine that story. They chose to dare to do something differently and to challenge themselves, although it's so difficult. But they refuse to be defined just by this destructive past. And so today, those same quarries, the very symbols of ecological damage, are being purposefully converted into community spaces or ecotourism sites, after, of course, many years of clearing up the waste, many years of monitoring, and now with strict guidelines to make sure that the natural ecosystem is kept safe. And at the same time, the council's exploring and implementing ways to be more circular, in the sense of even the main administrative building itself uses rainwater harvesting to clean the local market. So, very simple things in a way, but just a way to just highlight the power of what collective reimagination can do to a local council and to people in general. But I must admit that the work, being directly involved in this, the work that has been going on has been extremely challenging. And I think one that we can't necessarily put an end mark to. It's not easy. In fact, I think at this point, pivot is probably my team's favorite word, that we just have to pivot wherever we go and do the best that we can. And it'll be a continuous journey for the long run. But what's been most helpful is that it gives people hope that there could be other possibilities and opportunities, and especially so for the youth. I think Ipoh, just before I wrap up, Ipoh, although it's an aging city, most of the officers that we interact with are quite young. So it's essentially about investing in a future generation of policymakers and civil society leaders who are inherently systems thinkers, and so trained to see the link between a just society and a thriving planet. And that's where the energy is at anyway. We've been told by people born and raised in Ipoh just how much they appreciate Ipoh even taking up this leadership and wanting to explore and experiment, because it meant championing something meaningful together. So maybe I'll end with that, that in times of global uncertainties, the work of reimagining is so important because it gives people agency in the face of crisis. Thank you.
That's fantastic, Maisarah. Thank you. I was really struck by you saying that, do we really have to catch up to a broken model, join the queue for an inevitable collapse, and that we don't have to play that toxic catch-up game? I'm struck that you're sensing as countries turning more inwards, that this actually leads to the rise of the importance and the power of municipal government. And I'm really heartened to say that you're seeing a generation coming through, a new generation who are trained to be systems thinkers. So these are really powerful things. I have one question, which is I know from your team in Ipoh saying that other cities in Malaysia and even in the region are watching Ipoh and saying, well, come on, show us that this works, and then maybe we'll follow. And so that has a paradoxical short-term pressure on Ipoh to demonstrate something quite soon, resulting from a program which is actually about much more transformative long-term change. And so how do you balance that, you know, show us something now about actually a long-term vision?
Okay. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, no, we've been hearing from other cities and other municipal councils and states even, but a lot of it, as you say, takes on kind of a wait and see approach, right? Because people are maybe still a bit afraid to test out something new. The good thing is that it places healthy competition, because others, now that Ipoh has taken this up and is receiving a lot of, publicity for it, receiving a lot of attention, other councils are also looking and thinking, hey, that's also something that could be worth for us. But at the same time, they might not know where to begin. So it's healthy competition, the way that I see it. But the way that I see it also is this is where the storytelling of the journey is even more so important than rather than just focusing on, an end product. Because as I've mentioned earlier, it's a continuous journey that I don't think that there's really an end mark to. So it's continuously sharing the learnings and doing, peer-to-peer, council-to-council sharing so that people can see where they can potentially start with and continuously, pivot as we go. I think that's probably a good point to start with at this point.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Maisarah. Really, really rich sharing. And I'm sure it's going to be generating, I can see it's generating lots of questions and thoughts from people, and we're gathering them. Please do share your questions in the chat. We're going to gather them all and bring them back for our three panelists at the end. Thank you, Maisarah, for kicking this off so beautifully. So I'm going to invite Kamana Maikalani Bima, who is a professor at the University of Hawaiʻi-Mānoa and also the co-founder of ʻāina Aloha Economic Futures. And I want to say that, just to be clear, that Kamana's work is not directly putting Doughnut Economics into practice, but Kamana and I have a wonderful history of interactions. We did a podcast together. We did an event together in Oxford last year, looking at the very strong connections between Doughnut Economics and ʻāina Aloha Economic Futures. This isn't about the name, it's about the dynamics. And both of these ways of thinking are seeking to bring about regenerative and distributive futures. And I think Kamana's work is tapping into a long known and long held Hawaiian cosmology of regenerative, distributive futures, which is bringing it back. So let me hand over to you, Kamana. It's lovely to have you joining us today. We would love to hear your perspectives of what it's like to seek to bring about this transformative change in these times from your part of the world. Over to you.
Beautiful. Mahalo nui, Kate. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here with you folks. And I want to start by just acknowledging the power of your work, Kate. Doughnut Economics. I felt on a personal level, it's really helped us here in Hawaii to get in areas and spaces that we had never been able to, advancing indigenous knowledge systems and social justice efforts. The tools of Doughnut Economics, the vocabulary that you give us, the critique of GDP, and all of these systems have been incredibly helpful and rich. So, and I want to acknowledge everyone here on the call. It's very late here in Hawaii, and please excuse me. I'm battling a bit of a cold, so I'll try not to hawk it up too much. But let me go ahead and get started. So, Noke no translates to persevere, continue, add more, add on. And if you look at this image here on the screen, Nokeno, it actually explains the way the lava rolls across the landscape. I was about 11 years old when my grandmother threw me in the back of a VW bus with a bunch of her friends, and we drove out in the middle of the night to watch an eruption. And the first thing I remember is the smell of the sulfur, if anyone's been near a volcano. And eventually we approached this landscape, and I saw this deep red glow. It's called ʻēna in Hawaiian. It's this deep orange red glow. And my grandmother said, you know, you see that, Kamana dear, that's Nokeno. That's the way the pele flows. Nothing can stop her. She's anything that gets in her way, she burns up, carves, and leaves something new. And we have to be like the pele. We have to be this state of Nokeno, persevering, moving forward. And so in these incredibly challenging, vile times in many ways, I draw upon this image and the strength of my grandmother to help push us forward. And I'll just start with some relationships. So this was my grandmother. I was so lucky. I was the only grandchild, so I had no competition for attention. And just this incredibly courageous, brilliant, beautiful woman. She believed that really, you know, the truth and our culture and our place and our love, aloha, was really the way for the future. And it's something that I carry with me to carry on this malama ko aloha, to cultivate our love, and I try to pass it on to my children and my students in the work that I do. So again, I'm in the middle of a vast Pacific Ocean where I'm speaking to you from. Beautiful Pacific scholar, Hau'ofa, Epeli Hau'ofa, came up with this phrase, you know, rather than tiny islands in a vast sea, we're a vast sea of islands. And this is the way we see ourselves in our relationships to Mother Earth and to nature. We're not tiny islands, we're actually a vast sea of islands. And the Pacific is a beautiful place for learning and understanding how Mother Earth works. And so I'm in the most remote islands in the world, home to, you know, many organisms, over 1,000 marine species, 47 freshwater species, roughly 7,000 wildlife species. And here in our islands, we've actually lost over 1,000 species just in the last 200 years. So it's a place of loss as well. And when our ancestors first came to Hawaii, they saw this beautiful landscape and the rain. And the rain and the water systems is really what inspired our ancestors to develop social and economic systems that mimic the water cycle and system itself. So we've developed, in looking back at our ancestral systems, what we call the Hawaiian ancestral circular economy. It's inspired by water, and there's these different phases of it. It's about systematic and regenerative redistribution of wealth. Just like water, when it evaporates, it goes on the mountains. What does it do? It flows, provides resources as it goes down, and it recycles. Hawaii, like probably everywhere else, our experience with linear extractive capitalism has led to the degradation of our resources, and we can start that from, you know, whaling to the militarism that we experience here in Hawaii today. Our islands, you know, that ancestral system at one time fed roughly 1 million people. Today, we're about 1.2 million people, but the difference is 90% of our materials are brought in from somewhere else. So we're incredibly fragile. And here's an image on how most of the things come to Oahu, one of our main islands. And I'm sure it's similar for most places in Hawaii or across the world. Here's a glimpse, tourism. This is something that Kate's work actually helped to solidify in so many ways. So every year living in Hawaii, you'll see, oh, great, 9 billion tourists. Oh, okay, 11 billion tourists. The economy is doing fantastic. And everyone's looking around going, nothing feels better. Is anything getting better for anyone other than these numbers going up? And so these critiques of growth are so incredibly important, and to think about well-being of place and people. We also face militarism. Hawaii, one of the most beautiful places, arguably in the planet, very strange place to practice war. And in fact, we've experienced, the U.S. military leaking hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel into our aquifers. We're a live fire training place where we have bombing. Not far from my home, my house shakes when the U.S. military is bombing one of our precious areas called Pohakuloa. My kids go to schools, and they're taught to recognize, report, so on and so forth. So again, but militarism and you often hear these. If we don't have the military dollars, we don't have jobs. We need the GDP, we need the spending. And Kate's work helps us to critique and think deeper around, hold a minute, what's really going on here? So we're looking back at our ancestral systems, at our Hawaiian circular economy, and we're using that to inspire and to move forward in the efforts that we do today. Our work's incredibly inspired by Aloha ʻāina. Aloha meaning love, deep, courageous, care for, and ʻāina, land or that which feeds us. And this is really based off of a kinship relationship between people and resource, community and resource, and it's really framed a modern movement that you'll experience if you come to Hawaii today. We're really trying to build equitable systems based off of the ancestral circular economy, trying to prioritize relationship building. This is an image of community efforts to restore one of our ancestral fish ponds that provide proteins and feed herbivorous fish to boost kind of productivity across our islands. There was over 300 of these fish ponds at one time prior to the US occupation. We try to develop balanced governance structures. When these systems work, there's regular redistributions of wealth and power, promoting these regenerative social ecological practices and environmental kinship. We've experienced climate crises. Many have heard probably of the Lahaina fires. And COVID, all of these examples, and what happens is communities mobilize, and we're drawn upon this effort of Aloha ʻāina. And so even in the most difficult times, we're able to reorganize and re-energize our communities, even as we're suffering loss. Kate had discussed ʻāina Aloha Economic Futures. This is a effort myself and several of our colleagues kind of created coming out of COVID to try to open up Hawaii into a brand new economic system and structure. We've been successful in certain areas, and it's very hard right now with the current federal administration of the United States, who's getting up and saying climate crisis is a hoax. Nevertheless, we're moving forward, we're pushing, and we're based in Aloha ʻāina and in what we do. So again, I think it's just, Kate's work and these incredible synergies of some of our ancestral insights and knowledge systems and trying to bridge that with the best tools and techniques that we have today to shift what's a very, very old boy, systemic, old linear extractive system that does not want to die quietly. And to kind of close, I just want to reach out. I wish we were in the same room, in the same place, and we could share breath and maybe song together. But I just want to recognize everyone's collective efforts. I believe everyone here is a hero. The fact that we get up every day and we fight and we do the best that we can for our communities with limited tools and resources. And your folks' work inspires me. And I'll say, I've been to the end of the road and we all return to ʻāina. That's the beauty. Even the most vile humans among us, the ones that we may not want to see tomorrow, Mother Earth returns them and they become soil and they create life. And so somehow we have to remind ourselves that even in these most vile and difficult times, we're all collectively in this together. And I believe that, I'm speaking here today. One day I'm growing a tree and I hope that my grandchildren are telling stories about the good things that I did. But for now, I'm going to continue to fight. And what's at the end of your folks' road? You know, what are the structures and humps, bumps that we can collectively get each other over? And this is, again, just where I want to thank Kate for her tremendous work and courage. It's been one of the most incredible honors and privileges of my life is, you know, meeting Kate over Zoom and then developing this collective friendship. So mahalo nui and aloha ʻāina kākou. Thank you.
Mahalo, Kamana. Thank you so much. I sensed even over Zoom that so many of us were really moved when you showed the lava and told the story of your grandmother. The ʻēna, that deep red glow of the lava, the pele, the flow, if I'm getting my Hawaiian correct. These are beautiful, powerful concepts. And you're very generous and you refer to my work, but I must say that I merely wrote a book. And what happened was this book turned into this community, and it's this community that is the pele, that is the flow. And here we're gathering these days. So thank you. Thank you for being part of this and connecting with everybody here, because it's this community bringing the ideas to life that give it the ʻēna, the deep glow. Otherwise, it would merely be words printed on the page. So thank you, Kamana. I was really struck both by the photograph you showed of the fires that was so devastating in Hawaii. But I was also really struck by the photograph of your community gathered around the restored fish pond. And just the very different visceral feeling we get in our body when we see these two things, the devastation, but then also that powerful organizing. And I suppose I just want to ask you to reflect on, it's too binary to say which of these, but how do these two, the visibility of both of these, the visibility of devastation, but also the visibility of rising, of return, of remembering, how do you see these two playing a role in building momentum towards the future you want to create?
Yeah, I think, you know, in terms of experiencing climate crises and you know, the most difficult effects and impacts, they are absolutely here in Hawaii. You know, the area that I live in is supposed to be one of the cooler regions of all of Hawaii. I'm about roughly 3,000 feet above sea level, and every night it would be chilly and cold and foggy, and you know, we're in a massive drought. We haven't ever seen the grass this dry, and it's incredibly troubling. You know, I was on our state's Water Resource Management Commission, so you know, we allocate groundwater for drinking based off of models and predictions, and those models are proving to be wrong. And so we're really going to have to rethink, you know, a lot of our systems and structures, Kate. And but the thing that gives us hope is what could have saved Lahaina from burning is our ancestral resource management systems. If we could have gone back and the status quo would have listened to our communities and restored streams and restored fish ponds and wetland taro fields, Lahaina wouldn't have been the dry tinderbox that it was. And so we've suffered from, you know, generations of linear extractive, you know, economic systems that are plundering our small landscapes across our islands. And so, and then at the same time, that resilience, that resurgence is our belief in our ancestral system. So that's why 2,000 people show up at a fish pond in the middle of the day carrying rocks, you know, and we're not just talking about ethnic Hawaiians here. I mean, it's just all kinds of nationalities and ethnicities and languages, because caring for the ʻāina, when you heal the ʻāina, when you heal the earth, it heals a part of you, you know, and I think that's something that resonates across cultures, and it's just an honor to be a part of that. I mean, you know, I used to like the Return of the Jedis and all these great narratives of, you know, defeating darkness, and we found ourselves in an incredible story, and we have courageous actors, and we just gotta, you know, do the best and fight while we can with love. So, mahalo, Kate.
Mahalo, Kaima. That's Beautiful, beautiful words. Thank you. Very powerful. And as you say, people of many different ethnicities, backgrounds coming together with the rocks to build those fish ponds. That's a very, that image really lands in me. So from the ʻāina, from the land, that which feeds. This is my favorite Hawaiian word. The word for land is that which feeds. If only we understood that in our language and culture, I think we would get so much more right. From the ʻāina of Hawaii to the ʻāina of Birmingham. I'm delighted to introduce our third speaker, Imandeep Kaur, who is one of the directors of and co-founders of CIVIC Square, which is a stone's throw away from where I live in Oxford. And it was 5 or 6 years ago that over Twitter, Imi invited me and colleagues invited me just to go to Birmingham. And I went to see what they were starting to do with Doughnut Economics, and it blew me away. And they've become one of the examples that I know people from around the world now visit or learn from of what it means to actually bring Doughnut Economics to life at the scale of community. I know there's connections between Ipoh and Birmingham, for example. So I'm going to hand over to Imi because I think the work they're doing is so grounded and so fun and so playful and irresistible, and yet it's brilliantly attached to a deep understanding of world systems and change. Sorry, Imi, no pressure here, just hyping you up a bit. But yeah, really, there's so much we can learn from the playful colorfulness of what's done in Birmingham that really taps us into deep, deep change. So Imi, over to you. We would love to hear your thoughts this morning.
Morning. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, no pressure there, Kate. I have to say, though, I think it's really beautiful to go after Maisarah and Kamana. So thank you so much for your words, because I'm trying to force myself to stay on track with what I actually am going to say, because there is just so much to reflect on in those really rich foundations for this talk. So actually what I am going to do is give little context and dive straight in, because I think they've given such a beautiful foundation, whilst culturally and historically and ancestrally I come from a different part of the world. My parents descend from Punjab in India. So many of the ideas around the impacts of linear extractive economic systems on our landscapes, and so many of the ideas of some of what we find ourselves locked in was so beautifully shared. So I won't re-go through that. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share a few slides, and I'm going to share all of this in the chat afterwards, because there's lots of, oh, that's not what I'm doing. There's lots of links that I would like people to follow up on. There's absolutely kind of, when you start to talk about bringing Doughnut Economics to life, in reality, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tools and worksheets and films and games and papers and ways of organizing. And so there's so much that I know often comes out of the questions of when I share. But to just speak to Kate's prompt today a little bit around the times we find ourselves in, I think it is really important to understand the scale of the home street and neighbourhood that we work in as part of something much wider, and not to infantilize that layer of organising and communities as something that comes last, you know, the thing that you finally get to once all the big people have finally sorted out all the big and important things. It's also not a place or a foundation where folks don't deeply, in the neighbours we exist alongside of all different backgrounds, beliefs, as Kamana really beautifully put together. We are incredibly entangled, and fortunately and unfortunately in this together, regardless of the starting positions that, especially in the UK, many communities have found themselves at the harsh end of this summer. And for us, really connecting what is happening in the neighbourhood with a much broader story has been really, really critical. And this community and everyone who's listening today won't need me to repeat a lot of this. But when we talk about the moments that we find ourselves in, I've been spending a lot of time over the last 7 or 8 years trying to understand, how do you weave together the incredible ideas of Doughnut Economics with practice on the ground, with things that mean something for folks now, whilst organizing in this very, very long-term vision, whilst making it playful and imaginative and creative and translatable to many different realities, whilst also recognizing that actually in the entire time we've been organizing, the structural story around us has been fighting and holding on to the older extractive degenerative story more than ever. And this is situated within a climate story that is degrading, right? We know that we haven't made the progress that we set out to make. And we know that ideas like 1.5 were a kind of globally agreed temperature that largely the global north decided was the acceptable amount of warming from this economic system that we would be happy to allow and stay within, right? I want to just make sure that we're really clear that this is a level at which many people have lost everything, including our ancestors, including the impacts of colonization on so many different places. And so being able to tell this story and unpack it at the neighborhood scale has been critical in terms of mobilizing movements across many different ages, backgrounds, races, and so on and so on. And it's quite important to talk about this, because when Kate speaks about what are the times we find ourselves in, actually this rising authoritarianism, this rising need to move to quick answers is creating all of the stories that we know. Net zero is now dead in the water. You might as well not mention it for the next decade in the UK or the West. Ideas like sustainability, the greener movements, the climate story, these are going to be incredibly difficult narratives to situate within, because they are being delegitimized, criminalized, like, you know, everything that could possibly happen to them to erase them from the public discourse is happening. And so within this, a lot of our work is situated around finding the hope in the honesty. The work we did at 3 Degree Neighborhood, which I'll share in the chat later, gave a summary of this story. You know, where are we now? Where are we heading? And the reality is that we are hurtling towards a 3 degree planet at minimum, if we ignore, you know, tipping points, and there's a range of other things that could happen, which I'm not going to go into detail. And this is where we've been heading. And we haven't made meaningful change at a structural scale. And it's really important to acknowledge that at the neighborhood level, because actually a lot of the cynicism and a lot of the concerns around net zero across the stories that are happening have a lot of legitimacy in them. And being able to understand and listen to folks and to be able to translate climate knowledge and science has been a critical part of our story. And so we've been doing a lot of work socializing this, and I'll share this slide deck in the chat afterwards, looking at what are the risks, where are we, helping people to see themselves already in the risks that they're facing, and understanding where will this take us in the next decade, allowing folks to be able to tell their stories of that they are already overheating in their tower blocks, that their homes are struggling to cool down in the summer, that they are struggling to heat up in the winter, looking at research and practice that tells us that the poorest and global majority and people of color are going to be most impacted, and often historically and in our current context, they have had some of the least contribution to the global challenges we are facing. Being able to speak to these stories in the middle of Ladywood, in the middle of Birmingham, where we have a diverse, more than 100 nationalities, many who are in the UK as a result of colonization, as a result of being invited here to build their countries, to build this country, has been a really important part of being able to have people see themselves within the story, but not to be finding hope in just some ethereal, like, you know, we just need to be hopeful because that's a good thing to do, right? But really grounding their hope in helping them to see themselves when things don't feel right, when they're concerned about the net zero story, meaning more mineral extraction from their place, when they're telling you that they know that their housing is overheating before their neighbours. They know they're living in parts of the city that have been forgotten. They know they're living in parts of the city where green infrastructure has been depleted and where the deprivation and the things that they see across richer parts of the neighborhood or the city. Being able to do this has been a really, really important part of our work. And I'm sharing this because there's a whole range of different people in this chat and in this call today. And I just want to build a bit of a bridge and a link between many different types of work that we're doing. And so a big part of this, though, and I think, this speaks to what Kamana really has been also talking about, is looking at some of these stories within this context also means confronting how we are at the forefront of a new age of imperialism in the ways in which in the West we are thinking about how we're going to transition. So when people say to me, like, in the neighborhood, I think net zero is bullshit, I kind of say, sorry for that language, I kind of say, yeah, I think you're right, because the UK's climate transition strategy and energy strategy is based on a catastrophic amount of extraction from places that it is extracted from. We're already seeing the acceleration of genocides in Sudan, in the DRC, in many other places, and folks whose ancestors now live here in the UK. You could tell the same story of fast fashion in Bangladesh. You could tell a number of different stories, right? So being able to speak to this idea of like, you're absolutely right, this is a new age of imperialism. We are extracting at scales that are unfathomable, and we're talking about this as being the way that we're going to transition through into a more renewable and sustainable, and perhaps even the capture of the word regenerative has been a really critical part of our work. And being able to look back at the history of what got us here and be able to socialize this in ways that helps people to see themselves, their histories, their ancestries, their stories, their concerns in today has been a really, really important part of that. And so we find ourselves in all these bizarre lock-ins in the UK, which people don't like talking about, especially the current government, right? We find ourselves in all sorts of like really difficult points, like Maisarah talked about, where we are locked into a range of pathways that continue to extract, to destroy, to have policies and pledges that take us nowhere near moving away from 3-degree futures. And we are deciding a lot of this based on exponential extraction. If the UK met its net zero targets by 2050, it would require a 600% increase in mineral demand, and extracting that from many of the places I've mentioned before. And so when you start to talk about this in practice, it basically means that the current energy transition, just using energy as an example, we could use many, as the donut tells us, many other things. I could start talking about the biodiversity plans. I could take, another chunk and another wedge of the donut and start talking about that. But from this energy perspective, this means it's not viable. So actually, this is a pretty incredible starting point for us with the donut. And this isn't where we started. When I finish in a few minutes, I will take you back a couple of steps. But I wanted to speak to the wider context of why the donut matters so strategically now. It isn't just a great story and a vision. It actually enables you to work through what I would describe like a level of brain damage that is in the powers that be, right? Because it's like, I'm not entirely sure what you're talking about. By 2030, the demand for lithium, for example, could reach 15 times the current levels. Where are we extracting lithium, cobalt, and all of these rare earth elements from? We're taking them from 2 or 3 nations across the world where we're accelerating genocide, where we're accelerating the war machine. A lot of the processes and timelines don't make sense. A lot of the policies and pledges don't bring us back from 3 degrees. So in the middle of all of this, if somebody wants to talk about, well, let's look at what the science says, we've built a story that just isn't viable. And so for us, like, what does this mean then? What does all of this mean? And 3 degrees was really the kind of piece of work that we did to bring that story together. It means that if we haven't got we haven't got carbon budget, material budget, we haven't got the time to move and create the transitions we want to create, sustainable climate transitions, regenerative transitions in the UK, and I'm talking just from the UK context, we have to think completely differently. We need a completely different compass and set of foundational stories. And so for us, really looking at, if you didn't have the carbon and material budget to retrofit all of our homes, to put renewable energy on everybody's house, what would you do when you would start to think about maximizing the most amount of co-benefits we can achieve with every decision we make in our place? And so for those of you who know us, the many, many years of donut organizing, which I've put lots of images in the slides and lots of tools so you can take them away, took us backwards a little bit to actually go, hold on a second. If we just look at the way in which we're organizing, we don't have the carbon budget or materials, we don't have the skills, we don't have the supply chains, we don't have half of what we need to make the transitions we are looking to make as quickly as we need to. And so this really starts to build a story of what we're talking about around a civic-led transition, starting from a very different point, looking at what would happen. And this is where the great work of the donut, then taken by Home Earth and turned into a donut for urban development, really intersected for us in a really thoughtful way. Because actually where people live in their home streets and neighborhoods is where they experience many of the challenges and opportunities in which we can organize. It's a place where they feel most agency, close to where they are, impacting their everyday lives, while situated within a fractal of a system that is, the built environment contributes hugely, for example, to many of our material and carbon and material use and carbon emissions that we face. And so starting to use these tools in ways to go, okay, if we have a small amount of time and a limited amount of decisions we can make, what is the most creative ways in which we can think about this? And so with our neighborhood and our community, really looking over the last 5 or 6 years through all the donor organizing we've done, we started to really think about what would be fundamental transformations. If you only had a handful of things that you could really do, if we can't do everything on every house, if we can't continue to live in this extractive, neoliberal, everyone has everything, and like Maisarah said, everything just keeps improving, and that has to be in a certain vision. What does something else look like? What does it look like when we return to ideas of living together in the commons, shared resources, when we rethink the way we think about comfort, and so on and so on and so on? And so we developed a whole range of pathways, both structurally with our partners at Dark Matter Labs and with our neighbours, to look at what this looks and feels like in the everyday. What happens structurally when you rewild the neighbourhood? What does it feel like if I was walking in Edgbaston Reservoir, which is just down the road from us? And this was situated within, and I'm just going to finish now because I know I'm over time. Sorry, Kate. And so this sort of framework was really built then on the basis of looking at if the scale and severity of the crises we find ourselves in need us to substantively and structurally and systemically rethink. It's going to need many, many things of redistributing agency, support, resources to the most amount of people in our neighborhoods. And that idea of distributed by design from the donut really helped us to then think about all the underlying ideas behind what we're doing. What is the climate science showing, and how would we start to organize in the image of the donut? Where are the resources and finances for this coming from, and how would they be distributed in the image of the donut? What is the physical building design? And these are all publications, hundreds of pages of publications. That's why I have not shared these slides that you can look at. And what would they look like if they were designed to be regenerative and distributed by design, and starting to take those chunks of the donut and turn them into practice? And this situates itself within, again, a wider story of what a climate transition looks like when you genuinely are building in regenerative and distributive by design ideas into every layer of governance, of finance, of building design, of material use, and I could carry on and carry on. So why I just wanted to say that today was because a lot of our work looks, sorry, let me just show you, a lot of our work looks like this in the everyday: beautiful, playful. Every space we can, we turn it into a giant version of the donut. We use all the tools on the Deal platform. We walk around our neighborhoods, we explore the waters, we do workshops, there's 101 tools that you could find on the Deal platform, and they are incredibly helpful and incredibly thoughtful in helping you to get that story started, whether you're making something, whether you're creating something. We've got a whole zine day going on for Global Doughnut Day on our site. Whether it's looking at different campaigns and movements, it's an incredible way of beautifully bringing together a range of different ideas and stories into a cohesive idea of what a regenerative future could look like. But what I want to say really clearly, sorry, my slides are in the wrong order, is that in the UK, if you're in the UK, I think the UK context is really important to think about here. The net zero and sustainability story for us is going to be increasingly delegitimized. Over the coming years, we're going to see ourselves, and this will happen across many, many different authoritarian regimes and governments, especially in the West. And I think it's so important that Kamana and Maisarah have really deeply talked about the need for anyone not stuck in that, not to be like, the next thing we do is do what the West does and then try and catch up afterwards, right? But I think what we're starting to see, and where I think people should draw a lot of hope from, is that this sort of arch between the far right and what many would talk about as the far left, although I don't agree with that, we agree on a lot of very similar things. People are devastated by the loss of their physical and social spaces, the spaces to come together to find belonging, whether for us, it's the community centre, or for the white working class neighbours down the road who've lost their working man's club or their pub. We have lost a sense of being able to organise and work together. We've lost a sense of being able to experience the value we create. We've lost the sense of being able to make a living from the work that we do. And we're seeing all over the place anything to do with climate and net zero and sustainability being shut down before you can even open your mouth. But at the heart of our communities, in our places, at the scale of the home, street and neighbourhood, in the communities and neighbours that live in them, human and more than human, people are fighting and arguing deeply with love for the need for social and civic infrastructures to be returned. And within that becomes the heart of a story of what climate resilience, climate transition looks like, a place where we can think about how we come together, how we eat together, how we grow together. And what the donut really has allowed us to do is stretch those two worlds together. We can go from the huge climate science and tell a very different story from a very different foundation. And it isn't, to all the people who are saying, but what do you say to the hardcore economists that think it's just la-di-da? Nothing, you just play back the facts of their own story. Makes no sense. So it works really beautifully and solidly in the science and data space. But what it also does is gives people a foundation and a story in their own places and neighborhoods that makes sense. And when you can bring those things together, I think it is an incredible force. And I think that, we'll talk about this in the chat, what are going to be the tipping points. We don't quite know what the tipping points are going to be. I agree with Maisarah about waiting and seeing, but I deeply, deeply think that we are right on the edge of something incredibly beautiful. And in the UK, I think we're seeing hundreds and hundreds of ideas and communities working in this way. That story isn't uplifted at the moment, but as we start to uplift it, we will start to see that actually too many communities across the political spectrum, this is a story that makes sense. This is a place in which they want to fight. And so the home, street and neighbourhood and the scale of the community isn't just a small and nice to have that comes out later. It's the engine for how we rebuild the social, ecological fabric of our places with people at the forefront, human and more than human. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Imi. Very wise words. You've taken us on such an arc from 3-degree imperialism to these just beautiful illustrations of the imagined future in Birmingham that I just felt such a different energy when you put that wonderful, almost cartoon-like illustration of the green plants growing, the community thriving, as you say, living together, cooking together, eating together, growing together, working together. That you took our emotions on an entire journey. Thank you. And also this phrase that the expression you used, hope in honesty. I think that's really powerful. I've not heard that before, and it makes a lot of sense from a very three-word way of summing up the very ethos of what Civic Square has evolved into bringing to the world. And as you're speaking to the UK, but of course what you're saying resonates in many, many, many countries. So thank you for sharing that indeed. I've got an eye on the time. We've got 20 more minutes. So actually I'm going to invite back all of our speakers. So welcome back, Maisarah, welcome back, Kamana. I know that you'll have had so much richness between you. And I'm going to just invite first Maisarah and then Kamana and then Imi. Can I invite each of you to speak for 1 minute? 1 minute. This is 60 seconds. Just a one thought. I know you have so many things, but I do want to bring in the questions and voices of other people who are here. So just 1 minute. Imi, if you could go on mute for a moment, I think there's a lot. Thanks. If you could just, Maisarah, do you just want to share one reflection of everything that they said, then Kamana, then Imi, and then we're going to bring in questions from everybody on this call.
Okay, no, and thank you, Kamana and Imi. That was so beautiful, and so beautifully expressed and so moving to. So happy to hear all of that shared earlier. But I think the biggest thing that I just kind of took away from that and what really struck me is that the work that we do and where things are headed now is a reminder of where we also come from and how far we've strayed, especially in the work that for example, Kamana shared earlier in terms of, the ancestral community knowledge. We have that very similarly in Malaysia as well. There's a practice called Tagal. It's an indigenous knowledge practice as well, in terms of, protecting fishing, regenerating rivers so that there's, designating fishing, no-take fishing zones and such. But also more than that, I think I also really resonated with what Imi said about wanting, the sense of belonging. I think this is there's a real energy to that now. And I think a lot of it is also very much induced by, just social media and people gravitating towards a little bit more, just siloing themselves within their tech. But there's also pockets of resistance where people are demanding and asking for a bigger communal village spirit in a way. And I see this in Malaysia. There's offline clubs, there's book clubs, there's community spaces that dedicate them to, there's no online interactions at all, just so that people can be together and also create hope in that sense. And I think as we speak about tipping points as well, hope is a really strong positive tipping point that, I think we'll be seeing more of soon. But yeah, maybe that's probably all that I can cover in 1 minute.
Thank you, Maisarah. Wonderful. Kamana, over to you.
Yeah, I just it's such an honor to share this space, Maisarah and Imi, and was deeply moved by your reflections. Just trying to achieve community change in these really difficult and challenging times, and bridging these huge structures. Whether it's 3 degrees rise with trying to lead a community effort for restoration, and like you said, dealing with the skepticism, the rightful skepticism, of our communities. Why should we do these things? And meeting them where they're at, and empowering them. I think is so important. That image of, thinking of energy transitions and Kate's talk where she says, we have every kind of growth, green growth. It just reminds me of kind of that segment of Kate's talk, and showing the harmful impacts of the extraction of raw materials is so important. That visual that you have there, because people don't really get a scale and sense for what that takes. And yeah, we have a lot of work to do, in terms of educating the community and getting people to understand why we're going in the worst direction possible. But yeah, your folks' work is so empowering and hopeful to me. So mahalo for that.
Thanks, Kamana. Imi, just a reflection back on what you heard from Maisarah and Kamana.
Thank you. Well, I think it's, such a beautiful curation of this conversation, because what Maisarah and Kamana shared has so many deep roots and links in how a lot of our organizing started many, many years ago. And so there's something really important for me about being able to honor the multitudes that you brought to this story. I think often and what it means for us to be in dialogue together and to have this global solidarities, but also in sharing the patterns and the ideas of what we're seeing with from very, very distinct contexts in which, like, for example, we live now, but the narratives that you're sharing, the insights that you're having are so critical in what we experience. So I guess my big reflection is that we desperately need to find ways to get through the noise and to be uplifting these multitudes together. In our community, we have a wide range of backgrounds, and people are yearning for these conversations, and often they are infantilized, they often are kept away. People are looking for what's the simplest message that folks can understand. And I'm like, people are multitudes. People want dignity and art and creativity and hope and depth. And yes, that's hard to find when you're time poor, financially poor, etc., etc. But in your reflections, it was just really, really warming to hear that, you know, I haven't heard you guys speak for a couple of years, but the things that we all jumped to, we could carry on all day for hours just talking about the intersections in that. And I'm really grateful for the DEAL community for bringing that together. We've got to somehow find the essence of those and the space to have these bigger conversations as often as is possible, and to draw these links in solidarity. So I just want to say a huge thank you. But also, Kamana, I just want to say thanks for sharing so much of your ancestral wisdom. I think there's a lot of reasons why it's also not something that folks feel comfortable and good to bring onto the global stage due to histories, and I feel immense gratitude for your generosity as well. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Great, thank you, Emmy. So we've had some questions coming in from people. I'm going to kick off with a very practical question. Tom Bailey is saying, can we get a copy of your presentation, Emmy? Yes, she will share it.
I've put it in the chat already.
And I want to say that one of the things I deeply appreciate about Civic Square and what they model is that they share everything they put, right? They know that there are a very specific locality base. Not everybody can get to Ladywood, Birmingham, but Emmy and the team there share and make the time to document, share, knowing that they are a symbol of what could be done everywhere. So the tools are online, yes. So I'm going to come to, let me see, we've just got about a quarter of an hour. There are two questions that have jumped out that I'm going to ask at the same time, and I'm going to invite each of you to choose which or both you respond to. They're quite different though. One is from Doughnut saying, just how do you keep in mind that hardcore economists may think of Doughnut Economics as naive, even the name. Why are you talking about donuts? Or it's utopian. And you're going to run into hardcore economists, because if you're working at a local level, then you're going to either meet them if you're Emmy's team and you're working, you know, with the community, you're going to meet them at the level of the city council, or when you go to the national stage. I mean, Emmy's presentation was all about the UK's frame. In EPO, even if the municipality adopts Doughnut Economics, you're going to meet it at the state level or the national level or the region level, ASEAN level. In Hawaii, you're continually meeting it when you speak to the mainstream economists of the island or indeed of the US. So how do you cope with the fact that Doughnut Economics may be seen as naive? Amy began answering this, but I would invite the others to pick up on it if you like. But the second question, I'm going to bring them all at once because I'm just going to give you each one turn around answering. A question from Nikki Wilson. Nikki says, for all of the speakers, while wider community actors are essential, how important is finding a small group of local allies to work together as organizers to get started? And what size of core group have you found work? So something of your own, I know you can't universalize from your experience, but something of your experience of why these three examples got started. So something around getting going. And I think that's going to be relevant to many, many people on this call and beyond. So if I may, I'm going to come back to Maisarah first. So either, isn't it seen as naive, and how do things get started?
Yeah, thanks so much, Kate. I think in our engagements with governments, at least in Malaysia, right, we've also spoken to some hardcore economists, and I'll admit that it has been challenging. It has been challenging. But what has also worked is, you know, using the narratives that they might be able to understand, if they understand it in the forms of, you know, dollars and cents. So the cost of inaction is also there. There's already so plenty of research has been done in terms of, the cost of not acting on climate impacts, for example. So those are things that could kind of move things around a little bit. But then I think also speaking from the perspective of planetary health, the narrative of health in itself and well-being is so compelling. And for us to just not underestimate it, although it's something that might be new to economists, but they're also able to understand that there is an impact of it on human health, and therefore also an impact to the way that economies work in terms of their supply chains, in terms of their labor and productivity loss and such. So those are maybe one way, but reflecting a bit more on Malaysia's experience, actually surprisingly, the donut framing has been more helpful than anything. It hasn't really been understood as naive. In fact, I think there's the sense of playfulness has been helpful for people to grasp it, and they get excited about it. And I don't know if this is just because Malaysia has such a big food culture, so we love anything that's like food related and food themed, that we started thinking of, other donuts, other localized donuts that we can think of. But it's actually resonated more, so that we haven't really faced that struggle of people seeing it as naive. It's just more of influencing economists to see things in a different way for them to be able to act. Sorry, Kate, remind me again.
The other questions, just how what kind of size of core group got things going? A minute or two on just the origin story of action in Ipoh.
Yeah, honestly, I think it just takes one person. It really just took one person. In the case of Ipoh, it really started with, Dr. Jamila, who, is a close friend to you too, Kate, and having conversations with other people around, and it just kind of spiraled from there. But I think if, we want to talk about numbers, if you're familiar with the movie Pay It Forward, 3 is a good size if we just keep aiming for to influence at least 3 people. But I think what also matters is who those people are. We need one who has like the technical knowledge to be able to have, the factual data and such, but also somebody who is able to speak to power and have some level of influence. I think this is also really important in creating the windows of opportunity for people to affect change, especially when it comes to policies. And also finally, I think just somebody to keep things together. That coordinating role, I think, shouldn't be underestimated as well. And things really, grow exponentially from there, I think.
Thank you. And you're referring to Dr. Jamila Mahmood, who is a very well-known physician, and I believe certainly a couple of years ago was the second most trusted person in Malaysia after a famous sports hero. So of course she's in a very particular and unusual position to bring her decades of reputation and credibility to this project in Ipoh. And that's one way things can get started. So having a champion, bring it. Thank you. I'm going to come to Imi. A couple of minutes, Imi, and you already mentioned, is it naive? And you said, well, I just come back with the facts, which I think is a very, very powerful answer. If you want to speak more to that, or to how do you get started? How there's an amazing origin story here as well. So
yeah, thank you. Just to speak on there's 2 things that I want to say on the is it a kind of fad? Is it not credible? One is, I already said that in the talk. To expand a little bit, I think it's really important, especially, and I'm only going to speak on the UK's behalf, but of course we can draw these links across many similar economies, which is you got to remember that is a tool, that is an actual tool to kind of be a tool of oppression to make alternative, imaginative ideas seem incredible. We're working, if you get further down the line with the donut, you get to this point where you realize that our built environment is creating all kinds of harmful impact. And one such example is we need to use more natural and bio-based materials and reuse more materials, right? Natural and bio-based materials, just as an example to this story, are far better for 1,000,001 things. Can't tell you all about that now. Watch our Instagram or our talk, or follow our partners' material cultures for that. The amount of heat, literal and metaphorical, that natural materials get for being flammable, will they burn down? Will this happen? What about this? What about that? Like it's coordinated, right? You have to remember that both at the level of different lobbies and in the level of those holding on to power, this is not always just the like, oh, that's not credible because of the name of the donor. It's actually organized. It is to delegitimize many, many different things. And that's not me being like a, you know, a conspiracy theorist. It's just me saying you've got to also remember that there's a layer of that that is going to happen for a long, long time. And then the second side of this for me is what I said in the talk. You can also just spend, the longer you get into this work, if you're doing it over a long period of time, get into the key narratives that fundamentally debunk that alternative story, the science, the stories of value, the experiences of people's human and planetary health, the interconnections between extractive and exploitative growth and the impacts on people's everyday lives are there to see. And I just think that what we have to be able to do is play it at those different layers, the emotional layer of humans, the data layer, but also to remember and not get lost by this idea that it is organized. There will be a whole range of things organizing to make fossil fuel materials continue to be the ones that are used because that is profitable for a lot of people. There is all of these systems will be continuing to try and push down these stories. So we have to be smart and strong, and like Kamana said, fight that with love. And yeah, the organizing one, there's a whole, I've shared the deal story, we've written it all up, so yeah, I won't talk about that now.
Thank you, Amy. And if somebody from the deal team could share Civic Square's origin story, which they've beautifully documented on Deal's website in order to make it possible for others to learn from their example. Thank you, Amy. Kamana.
Yeah, I like Emmy had mentioned and Messiah, I think there is you know, we're fighting against a structure that doesn't want to go quietly. People are profiting, but very few people, but they're extremely profitable for very few people. And so I do believe what Emmy's saying, there's a power wants to illegitimize any alternative visions and futures. And so I think that's a part that we have to be knowledgeable of. It's sort of interesting from my vantage point, you know, in the middle of the Pacific. Kate, when I discovered your work, Aloha ʻāina largely was seen as, you know, it's just rubbish. It's a dream. You know, indigenous people, you could never achieve this. I mean, we had everything thrown at us. And then when I saw, you know, your work on Doughnut Economics and your TED Talk, and the critiques of growth and GDP, it resonates so well for islands. Like I said, we look at tourists. People get tired, and tourists are great as individuals, but I'm saying as a structure, our islands can only hold so many. And so when the news would tell us, fantastic, you know, economy is doing great, we got 10 billion, we got 12 billion, at a certain point, people just start to feel like, but nothing's better. Who's benefiting from this? And so I was able to flip, you know, some of, you know, I call that old extractive system the archaic system that degrades resources in our islands. And don't we want to be, you know, like Kate and others around the world that are innovating and thinking of regenerative economic systems and structures? And so kind of just turning it back on the assumptions of the economists, I think is really, really helpful. And getting back to people's health and well-being, because the system isn't working for most people. So meeting them where they're at, I think is even more important than combating the economist that's divorced from the everyday actions of society in any case. And then I think the number for organizing, people you trust, you know, I think I've benefited from generations of Aloha ʻāina in our movement. And so I have people that I trust from family relationships and things that their parents and other people have done. And so our organizing really builds off of that. But finding, you know, like-minded, value-based people around the world is so important. And these global expansions, I think, is so critical and important, because power benefits from us, you know, our ideas and our thoughts, you know, being shackled in terms of what is possible. And these international collaborations and reach outs, I think, expand the idea of what's achievable in so many ways.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you, everybody, for this incredibly rich and profound opening session of our Global Doughnut Days. Maisarah reminded us that countries and communities don't need to try to catch up with a broken model. Kamana introduced us to the ʻēna, the inner glow of lava that gives it that pele, that just irresistible, unstoppable flow, which I believe is what this community is part of, a much, much bigger pele. And Imi invited us to find hope in honesty. And Kamana reminds us that we can do that with those we trust. And that is exactly why this community exists, so that we can connect like this, not just on these Global Doughnut Days, but throughout the year. We can find people we trust who have a vision that is close enough to the one that we share, that we trust, to learn together from each other. How did you get started? How do you organize? What tools do you have? How can I learn from your presentation? So this exemplifies why we exist as Doughnut Economics Action Lab. Thank you so much, Imi, Maisarah, Kamana, and to everybody for all of your work, for all of the events that are going to happen over the next 3 days. There's an amazing array of events. Thank you for sharing deeply in these challenging times in ways that give us honesty, but still fill us with hope. Thank you, everybody, very much indeed. And we look forward to 3 fantastic days and years ahead of this work. Thank you.